Now, those of you who are regulars on my channel know that one of the happiest moments of 2020 for me was on September 4th when Donald Trump banned training in the federal government that is based on critical race theory. Typically, these types of trainings show up as anti-racist trainings, internalized racial superiority trainings, white fragility, stuff like that. Sometimes they're called diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings. Now, to be really clear, there are actually a fair number of diversity trainings that can take place in organizations that have nothing to do with critical race theory at all. I am not talking about those trainings that legitimately help people understand how to communicate and collaborate with people who have different life experiences than them. There can actually be some really effective trainings in that area. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about are trainings based specifically on critical race theory. The underlying foundation of critical race theory is that all white people are racist. They have always been racist. They will always be racist. And what these trainings do is require employees to go to these trainings, whether they're for like an hour or sometimes they take place over several days at a retreat, and confess their inherent racism, talk about all the ways they've been racist in their lives, even if they have to make it up. Because remember, white people are not capable of not being racist in the eyes of these trainings. So even if you have to make something up, you are still expected to come to the table and confess all your sins and literally write letters of apology to your coworkers of color, even if you've never done anything wrong. That is the expectation of these trainings. And so Donald Trump, about a week and a half ago now, issued a memo specifically barring these types of trainings from the federal government. The CDC, as reported today by Chris Rufo, my favorite journalist that is on a crusade against these trainings, the CDC has apparently ignored this executive order. Just chose like, ignore it. We don't have to listen to Trump, and they are actually continuing on with these trainings according to new evidence that Chris has obtained that shows what's going on. So we're going to take a look at what Chris Rufo has discovered, and, listen guys, if you've seen my videos on this stuff before, it's going to be a whole lot more of the same, to be honest, because these trainings are all similar. These trainings all follow this insane, crazy ideology, but I have to admit, I am a little impressed at the gall of the CDC director to blatantly ignore a clear executive order that was given by the President of the United States to stop spending taxpayer money on trainings that teaches people that they are racist. That's what they do. That's what they do. So let's take a look at what Chris has discovered. He tweeted this out today. The CDC is moving forward with critical race theory training program in violation of POTUS's executive action. I've obtained leaked documents that outline the CDC's plan to examine the mechanisms of systemic racism and address white supremacist ideology. Listen, there are a lot of code words that come up anytime you are in this type of training in an organization. If you hear systemic racism, that is training based on critical race theory. If you hear anti-racist, that is training based on critical race theory. And it's also a completely Orwellian term because anti-racist is actually code word for racism. It is completely Orwellian. Every time they say you are an anti-racist, it probably means they are overtly acting as racist. So let's see what Chris found. And actually, he has all this documented on his website. I will link to it in the description below so you can go and look at these documents for yourself. Maybe you want to even, if you think your company or your organization might be doing this type of training, maybe compare what Chris has put forward with what your own company is doing to identify whether or not you're being required to do training that is based on critical race theory or you're doing a different type of training. Because again, I really want to emphasize this. In covering this type of information, I don't want people to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are wonderful trainings that you can do in workplaces that will help increase collaboration on teams, increase communication on teams, help each other to see each other as individuals in a more human way, approach each other in a more human way. There are wonderful trainings you can do. Just not this. This is not going, and one of the reasons why this training is so problematic is not just that it teaches people a fundamentally racist ideology. It's that there's no proof that this stuff works. There is literally no proof that these trainings are actually more effective. In fact, the only evidence we have about the effectiveness of these trainings in organizations essentially says that you're better off doing nothing than doing critical race theory training. That is exactly what it says. So let's see what Chris found. The 13-week series is called Naming, Measuring, and Addressing the Impacts of Racism on the Health and Well-Being of the Nation and the World. I have obtained the internal emails in white and an APHA presentation by the series instructor that follows the same structure in blue. So let's take a look here. He's got this email, learning series, naming, measuring, and addressing the impacts of racism and well-being on the nation and the blah, blah, blah. The course sessions will occur over 13 weeks to equip participants to name, measure, and address the impacts of racism on the health and well-being of the nation. Successful completion of this learning series will increase the participants' ability to identify three dimensions of health intervention, as illustrated by the cliff analogy, define racism, and identify 3 levels of racism that impact health, as illustrated by Gardner's tail allegory. Now, when they're saying define racism, what they mean is not the definition of racism that most of you know, which is thinking that you are superior to someone based purely on the color of your skin. How these people define racism is power plus prejudice. So what they say is that if you're not white, you can't be racist, because the basic premise behind systemic racism is that white people control the systems of power, and therefore white people are the only people that can be racist. Now, of course, we know that's absolute bunk. Anyone can be racist. Anyone can say, I am better than you based on the color of my skin, whether they are white, black, brown, whatever. Anyone can say that, but that is not the definition they are using of racism here. In fact, there has been a concerted effort to change the definition of racism. Literally, go look at it in the dictionary right now. It is probably not the definition of racism that you know, because these crazy people have actually gotten the dictionary definition of racism changed, okay? Let's keep going. Measuring racism in health surveys. Name the necessary tasks in structuring campaigns to address racism as a public health crisis. This is another one of their big things lately, making racism a public health crisis. Why would you want to make racism a public health crisis? Well, guess what, folks? As soon as racism gets officially blessed by a government as being a public health crisis, that opens up a boat ton of resources to fighting systemic racism. Now, what do they mean when they say fighting systemic racism? What they mean is pulling down all of the structures that we have created in our society over the almost 250-year history of this country, and actually going back before that, before we officially, became a country, pulling down every single structure that has existed ever and building anew. That is what they mean when they say solving for systemic racism. You can, in the minds of these people, you cannot solve for systemic racism until you destroy completely every single structure that we have worked for centuries to build. That is what their goal is. This is why they are out burning down buildings. This is why they do this with reckless abandon. They don't care. They are literally trying to burn all our structures to the ground. That's why we see that manifested that way in places like Kenosha, like Portland, like Minneapolis, now in Rochester, in Lancaster. Like, this is why you're seeing this, and this is why it will not stop. It will, and this is also why they don't actually have demands. Like, look at Black. When was the last time we actually had a conversation about what the protesters wanted? They don't want anything. They want to destroy our society. Let's keep going. Use the question, how is racism operating here, to examine the mechanisms of systemic racism and identify the levers for intervention necessary in decision-making processes. Operationalize 3 principles for achieving health equity. not equality, equity, that's different, and addressing barriers to change, organizing for action using anti-racism, ding ding ding, keyword, collaborative and collective action team model. And then he's got the instructor for the course, who of course has all sorts of fancy degrees, blah, blah, blah. This is put on by the American Public Health Association, guys. This is what we're talking about. The first 3 training sessions are focused on racism, sexism, and other systems of structural and structured inequality, then teaching CDC employees that they must address institutionalized racism to really set things right in the garden of a racist nation. I mean, let's think about that for a second. That is essentially when I'm talking about they want to pull down all the structures of our society, it's because they view the United States as a fundamentally racist nation. Now, I don't buy into that. I hope you don't buy into that either. Has the United States had its problems? Of course. Do I believe that we still have a reckoning when it comes to slavery? Yes, I actually think, and I know a lot of you would disagree with me on this, I actually think there is actually even an argument you could be making for reparations. I believe that if something like reparations were to happen, it should be an investment in things in the community that are going to make the most sense, that are going to have the most chance to lift up people out of poverty and those types of things, give more opportunities to more people. I think there's absolutely arguments you could be making for that. I do not believe in cash payments. That's stupid. People are going to go out and blow it like on big screen TVs and stuff that they don't really need, just like lottery winners. This is why many lottery winners run out of money within a year, because they don't know how to manage the money. But if we make investments in programs that are actually going to change the lives of real people, hey, I would be on board with that. But I do not buy into this notion that fundamentally we are a racist nation. Absolutely not. All right, this is session 1, levels of human intervention. Cliff analogy animation, provide and curate preventative health services. I'm not going to read all this stuff because gets kind of boring, but basically on this one, they're learning about the levels of intervention. And then on session 2 and 3, what is race? Rough proxy for social class, rougher for culture, meaningless for genes. The social interpretation of how one looks in a race-conscious society. Are they actually making the argument here that race is a social construct? It's an interesting argument to make. Okay, what is racism? A dual reality. A restaurant saga allegory which demonstrates to those who have already seen this country as a land of equal opportunity that racism exists, and that it creates a dual reality just like that was created with the open and close sign. Okay, so what she's arguing there is that if you do not see this country as a fundamentally racist nation, basically, if you come in and say, this is a land of opportunity, the American dream is available to anyone who wants to work hard for it, what they're saying is, oh, you are just living in the reality of a white person, and that is not the reality that exists for anyone who is not white, including people like Colin Powell's children or Will Smith's children. They're going to make the argument that those kids don't have access to opportunities that are available to every white person, even the poorest of white people who grow up in rural places where they don't have great schools. They're saying that those white people are actually better off than the children of millionaires and celebrities. Definition of racism as a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value on the social interpretations of how one looks. See, I told you they changed the definition of racism. They're defining it as a system of structuring opportunity. The unfairly disadvantages some individuals and communities, unfairly advantages other individuals and communities, and saps the strength of the whole society through a waste of human resources. So again, they're talking about something that exists inherently because they're white people. That's exactly what it is. White people controlled the US, they controlled the power structure, they were the ones that put these systems in place, and therefore they only built systems that are going to benefit white people. That is what they were arguing as the definition of racism. Definition of the 3 levels of racism to understand how racism can turn into health outcomes: institutionalized, personally mediated, and internalized. All right. In sessions 6 through 9, the CDC claims that racism is a public health crisis, and that systemic racism leads to police killings of unarmed Black and brown men and women, and leads to the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. I'm sorry, CDC, by sheer virtue of forcing your employees to go through this training, you frankly lost your dang privileges for me in terms of an organization that I plan on listening to when it comes to COVID-19 or frankly many other things. States and jurisdictions their goal apparently is to get states and jurisdictions to claim that racism is a public health crisis. Timeline and geography, research into how this came to be, analysis of contents and declarations. This is insane, guys. Our taxes are being spent on this, even though the president of the United States has already banned it. And they're just saying, nope, Trump, psych, we're not listening to you. On this one, sessions 8 and 9, asking how racism is operating here, examining the mechanisms of systemic racism, structures, policies, practices, norms, values. This has nothing to do with actual white supremacists. People would say, I am better than you because of the color of my skin. This has nothing, I'm sure that's going to get clipped somewhere, but this has nothing to do with that methodology. This has to do with saying that everything about the United States is racist. That is what they're arguing. And saying with regard to police killings of unarmed Black and brown men and women, and with regard to disproportionate impact of COVID-19, we've already seen this. So what they're doing, what they're going to be presenting in these sessions is basically, this is going to be an exercise in confirmation bias. They're only going to present data that supports these points. They are not going to present data that goes against these points or contradicts the points they're trying to make. Let's look at this slide. Police killings of unarmed Black men. How is racism operating here? Identifying mechanism structures defined as the presence or absence of civilian review boards. Policies defined as the use of the grand jury system to indict police officers. Okay, so they're actually making the argument. Holy crap, guys. Okay, I'm gonna bring this back to what just happened in Lancaster. Practices over policing of communities of color and norms. Blue code of silence values view of Black men as inherently threatening. I don't know if you guys have seen the video that came out from Lancaster today, which is essentially a Black man was shot in Lancaster by a police officer. I'm not sure exactly if he died or not, but I mean, honestly, it really doesn't matter because the fact that a Black person was shot by a police officer was enough to spark riots in Lancaster all last night. Now, the body cam footage of that incident came out today. And if you watch that body cam footage, what you see is a Black man running out of the house, holding a knife, charging at the police officer, acting like a crazy person, the police officer running away until he finally turned around and shot him. That's what you see on that footage. It's available on Twitter. I actually tweeted it earlier today. That's what you see. And so what these people are actively doing is defining that act of a police officer doing his job when being charged at by a crazy person with a knife as an act of racism. This is the reality in which we are living in today. Let's keep going. In sessions 10 and 11, the trainers will teach CDC employees that they must target and destroy the values of focus on individual and the myth of meritocracy, the myth of the American exceptionalism, and white supremacist ideology. This is textbook critical race theory. Yes, yes, yes. So let's see. I wonder if I can make that a little bit bigger. Apparently not. Apparently my computer does not want me to make it any bigger, but we'll do the best we can. Okay. So basically, actually, no, let's just go off of Chris's definition here. Sorry, hang on. Okay, so focus on the individual. Now, in previous videos, I have argued that one of the goals of this ideology is actually to move us from a society in which focuses on the individual and the accomplishments of the individual and individual achievement, individual empowerment, to a collectivist society, which is code word for communism, socialism, communism, whatever. I mean, that's what they're actually arguing for. Like, the American spirit is very much a spirit of individualism. It's of individual achievement. It's of its mindset that I can work hard and do really well and become successful. Whereas once you get into this collectivist mindset, that is antithetical to their basic idea of what the American dream is. That is what they're trying to destroy. Let's keep going and look at the slides. There we go. Narrow focused on the individual. Self-interest, narrowly defined, limited sense of interdependence, limited sense of cultural efficacy, systems and structures as invisible or irrelevant. So what they're, again, this is saying that individualism bad. We should go to a collectivist society. Guys, that's China. That is what China is doing. If you want to go live in China, you go live in China. But I don't want to live in China, man. I'm cool. Maybe I'll visit China. I'm actually supposed to go to China next year. Who the heck knows if that's going to happen now? But you guys can go and live there if you want to. But I'm going to stay here. A historical stance. The present as disconnected from the past. Current. Okay, so what they're saying is if you argue that what they're essentially saying is that people today are responsible for slavery. That's what they're saying. And they're saying that if you argue that you as a person who has never owned a slave and has never lived during a time when slavery exists, don't take responsibility for there being slavery in this country like 200 years ago, then you are just, you're arguing that we are disconnected from the past. That's what that means. And the myth of meritocracy, if you work hard, you will make it. So what they're saying is that only white people make it if they work hard, but that is not the reality for anyone that is not white. And if you think that that is the reality, that is an opportunity that's available for everyone, then you are a racist. This is the CDC. Jesus. Like, sometimes I just get overwhelmed with how crazy this stuff is. Myth of a zero-sum game. If I gain, you lose. I mean, I actually do think that the idea of a zero-sum game is a myth, to be honest. Like, actually, it's funny. I was just having a conversation with Joshua probably about an hour ago. Joshua is my coach. You guys see him every Tuesday night on this channel. But we were actually talking about the fact that, like, I don't really think I have competitors for anything. I've never thought I had competitors because I believe that there's enough opportunity for all of us to achieve what we want. And, we maybe just do it in different ways. But I actually would agree with that one, with taken out of this really specific context. Limited future orientation, a disregard for the children. I don't know what they mean by that. Myth of okay, so this is where they're getting into America as a fundamentally racist country. They're talking about the myth of American exceptionalism. Guys, America's awesome. It's awesome. Talk to any immigrant, and I have had conversations with my husband about this. Talk to any immigrant that has lived somewhere else, or if you've lived somewhere else yourself, and you understand just how awesome America is. And then we have that America has a fundamentalist white supremacy ideology that we need to undo by undoing systemic racism, where hierarchy and human valuation, white as the ideal and the norm. No one thinks that white is the ideal and the norm except for actual white supremacists. And that's what leads a lot of people to saying that critical race theory is a fundamentally racist ideology, because these people, it doesn't matter if they're black or brown or white or Asian or any other skin color. These people that buy into critical race theory fundamentally believe that white is the ideal and the norm, and that should be dismantled. They fundamentally believe that's the truth. Robin DiAngelo in White Fragility talks about how she has been racist since the womb. She fundamentally talks about this. And then the final session teaches CDC employees how to become activists, because that's what we need at the CDC, to have a whole bunch of little activists running around the dang Centers for Disease Control. They will be encouraged to join an anti-racism collective with 8 collective action teams focused on communications, making scientific publications anti-racist, and influencing policy and legislation. You can see here, oh, good, teach our full histories like the 1619 Project. Good, something that's factually inaccurate. Education and development, how can we support training around the issues of race, racism, and anti-racism? And develop a communications toolbox, blah, blah, blah. Anti-racism chats, civic dinners, town hall meetings. These people are insane. I know I say that a lot on this channel, I know, but I just can't think of a better word for it. If you have a better word for it, leave a comment below and let me know. Chris concludes, my whistleblower is outraged, saying, I thought maybe they would wisely cancel this training series. Instead, we got a message this morning confirming the pressure to participate is palatable, and if you don't, you will have to explain why you aren't a racist. We are in the midst of a pandemic, and the CDC is prioritizing a critical race theory training program that is in direct violation of a presidential order. CDC director must immediately terminate this program and focus on COVID-19, where the CDC has been disastrous. And then he says, finally, I want to issue a warning to every federal department in the United States. If you violate the president's order on critical race theory, I will find you, expose you, and shut you down. And of course, a lot of people, like, guys, please follow Chris Rufo on Twitter, because a lot of people right now are sending him documents. I know it sometimes seems as though the loudest people are advocating for critical race theory, but there are so many people that are in these organizations that know that this theory is this training is nonsense, that it's harmful, and they're doing their best to get this information out there. But the best thing you can do to help is to share this information. Share Chris Rufo's tweet, share this video, make sure as many people as possible understand what this training actually is, because how it's being portrayed in the media with Trump banning it is Trump is being racist and banning racial sensitivity training. How dare he? He's obviously a racist. That's not what this training is. People have to start understanding it, and they have to start learning how to identify it. All right? Guys, that's all I've got for this one. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to my channel, turning on notifications, giving it a thumbs up, sharing it out, all that good stuff. And I'll see you soon.